What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic Podcast. Today, episode 46, we're going to talk about setting yourself up for success. I am Danny. I'm here
Ooh.
with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Hey, Danny. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So, setting yourself up for success, right? We all want this. I think everybody wants success. Why did you think this was a good focus for today?
Well, as a matter of fact, I was listening to a YouTuber, successful businessman, but he's successful in more than not just financially successful. And this is what I really like about him. Like I'm very drawn to people who are successful financially, but also have figured out how to win at life. And I think that's the biggest differentiating factor between like a financial success and someone who's actually won in life. And so I was watching, actually, I've probably watched like a dozen of his videos so far. His name is Alex Hormozy.
He's good,
And
yeah.
oh, phenomenal, phenomenal. And it's just like the realizations that I had from watching his videos, and I just haven't heard these things anywhere else. So I want to be able to share that.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because what you said is so important. The idea, we tend to think of success as like just very wealthy or just very famous. Like we think of it in these very sort of like cherry picking, just one thing type, focus on that. That's we use wealth because it's an easy way to evaluate, compare, but it doesn't mean you're doing well. And I think, it's kind of like what you said sort of speaks to like the Greek idea of eudaimonia, right? The flourishing life. Like it's like you're successful in life, not just in what you do, but it's a well-rounded, right? Good life. It's all around. You have a good character, good personality, happy, positive, all these things that go with like being, able to do things in the world. Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, and so he suggested some things in there, and we'll talk about them later, I'm sure. But it's kind of, I mean, the idea for the episode, setting yourself up for success, I think that it's something that if you prepare for, you can really end up being a lot more successful than if you just set out without preparing for it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, it's funny, I think, when you start to like even just have a basic rudimentary idea of what you want and commit to going for it, you start to see the gains so quick. And I think, I noticed personally too, like I think it's so easy to feel like everything's like overwhelming or hopeless and feel like you're lost or that there's no point in trying. But once you start trying and you start to see success in even like a little area, I think it really does compound and snowball, and you start to build out on, you can start to build out really on your whole life and on making things better all around. I think that's where the success comes in, right? But you do need to plan for that. You need to set yourself up. Because I mean, I think it does involve kind of a lot. I mean, in the first part, it involves like, you know, trying and having that, like, having even like not just the motivation, but, the willingness to give it a shot, to try to do something in the world that you want to do, and then keep at it and to keep working at it and not get sort of knocked down so quickly by, factors outside of yourself.
Yeah. So I guess to begin with, you've kind of mentioned it a bit there, is defining what you want. And it's funny because that's the first step, but so often that can be one of the most difficult steps, because it's like the more tangible and real and actual value you can place on something, the faster you'll get it. Like I have so, because we both journal a lot, and so like a lot of things that I do is I write down goals. And when my goal is non-specific, like I want more money, okay, when I have that goal, it never gets achieved. But when I write down I want to earn X amount of dollars per month by this month, it gets done. And it's
Yeah.
just like, but the important part is figuring out that goal and what it is for you. And also like that, I think that's an important thing, what it is for you. Because where we get lost on this route to success is we want the things that will impress people on Instagram or
Yeah.
TikTok, you know, and it's not part of who we are. It's not what we actually want. We just think that when we have that, other people will like us more, will be more popular, yada yada yada.
Well, I think too, he mentioned I think he mentioned in the video you sent me that the guy did. I can't remember his name. What's his name? But
Alex Hormozy,
Hormozy.
Hormozi.
Okay.
Yeah, look him
Yeah.
up.
So
Watch some of his videos; they're great.
no, he is. He's great. And I think he mentioned something I really liked that he mentioned was this issue of, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head there is one, actually being able to clearly define your goals so you know what the hell you're actually going for. We've said before tons of times, right? Vague goals give vague results. You don't really know what you're aiming at. If I don't know that I want to increase my wealth X number, or I don't know that I want to complete this chapter this week, or whatever it is, or even just like to that, my goal is to work out 5 days this week, not two, not three, but five, like having a specific number that you can actually like know that you've done it and writing it down is two huge steps to making it a realization. But the other important thing too is like that whole issue we've talked about before, comparisons. And if you're always looking to like impress people on YouTube or on, TikTok or whatever, or you're always comparing yourself to some external thing, there's always going to be people that have more, that are better. And it's really about like what is success to you? What does it look like? And I think he mentioned in his video that I really liked, he said, when he first started out, he said something along the lines like, he thought of like wealth in terms of like meals, like how many meals he could afford. And that was his unit. And it's like, I like that because it was very personal. It was like, so if I'm doing well, I can afford lots of meals, right? You have this idea in your head of what it looks like, what the sort of, relative sense of like having money looks like to you. Because I think that's important because, we don't all need everything. We just need what's good for us to live a successful life and to live the life we want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also another thing, the writing it down part. So writing it down,
Yeah.
you and I both do this, and I mean, it's something that we hear about so often. Like everybody says, write it down, but if you're not writing it down, write it down. You have no idea how much more of an impact. Like I'm listening to this book on Charlie Munger right now, who is Warren Buffett's investing partner, and it talks about Warren Buffett saying that like if you haven't written it down, then it just means that you haven't put in enough time. Like you need to,
Yeah.
he's like anything worthwhile, you need to write it down. It needs to be written down.
Do you know, and you know what's funny about that too? I think that people miss is like, it is part of it's just the simple task of like, it takes 10 seconds to write down your goal. And you're 40% more likely to achieve it if you write down. So right there, that's just stupid not to. It makes no sense. But the other side, I think that people often miss, at least that, and I've seen this in my own experience, is like when I write down my goals, when I write down things I want, I also end up reflecting on how to get them. I also end up jotting down notes on like, well, if I want X, I should probably do Y and Z. And I start thinking about in my head, especially too, like how to plan it out. How am I going to make it happen? I might jot down some of those notes on paper, and all of that is part of the thing. If you just think it and you let that thought go, it's like, who cares? You didn't do anything with it. But once you write it down, you've started actually doing something with it. And I think that's like the biggest difference that people miss. And it's the simplest goddamn thing in the world, right? It's like, it's so
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah. And so like Brian Tracy, he wrote a great book called Goals. And this was like where I got the idea to kind of write down with a time limit on them when I'm going to achieve them and write down 100 goals that I want. But the first chapter of the book, he says, if you do these three things, you will achieve all of your goals, or at least very, very close. If they're possible, you will achieve them. Those three things are write down your goals, write down how to achieve them, and work on your goals every day.
Yeah, right. That's it.
It's like literally,
It's not hard.
it's so insanely simple. And everybody's looking for these complex. What are the life hacks? How can I do more? It's like, just do these three things. Just do it again and again.
Yeah, it's funny too. And I think so many people struggle with it too, because it's like we literally create so many limits for ourselves and so many obstacles that don't exist in reality, that aren't even there. We set all these burdens on ourselves, all this pressure, instead of focusing on what can I do? How can I make it happen? What do I actually want? What does success look like? Instead of focusing on those things that are in my power that I can make happen, we worry about all this shit and make ourselves basically incapacitated, right? We make it so we can't act. And I think this is something we all struggle with at some point, right? The overwhelming fear, anxiety, stress, hopelessness. And really all you need to do is start acting. And I think, yeah, like a lot of things can seem out of place, but once you start taking care of some, it's like you can just start building and you see that it's possible. Because I think our biggest thing with writing down too is that you're starting to take you're starting to take responsibility for your goals, right? By writing them down, you're starting to say, how can I do this? What do I actually want? And you're starting to plan it. And like what you said too, I think that's important. Once you start doing it, writing a date is so helpful. And like being realistic too. And I think I've noticed this myself, you get better at time with how to date them appropriately and having a realistic idea, because at first we're all kind of terrible at this. I think we don't always sort of grasp that, how long things might take, or, obstacles. But again, these are all plastic. You can adjust them as you go if you need to. That's the other great thing. It's your life, right? You make it happen.
Yeah. It's really interesting because like for instance, in the morning I write down 10 goals that I want with a time frame. And when I first started doing this, probably back in like February or January, something like that, it was very difficult because from one day to the next, I wouldn't know what the goals were. Like they would change so dramatically. But now I've been doing it for months, and literally every day, like my top 7 goals are generally about the same thing. And then every few weeks I knock another one of them off and another one off and another. And it's just like, you get to it becomes autopilot. Like you're just in that direction because this is what you want to do, and you're just doing the stuff to get there.
Well, I like that too, because I noticed that myself. As like you start to see more consistent patterns over time with what you're doing, both in your life and also aligning with your goals. And part of that is actually you're forcing yourself by doing this every morning. You're forcing yourself to be more aware of what you want by focused, right? Because I think our biggest dilemma is, we might wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be productive. I'm going to do these 3 things. I'm going to get this done. But as soon as you wake up and start moving, life is all around you, right? And it's like there's distractions, there's obligations, there's obstacles, there's, work, whatever. And there's all these things you have to say yes and no to. And when you lack focus, you don't know what to say yes and what to say no to. But the more you focus, right, the more direction you have, the more intentional all your actions become.
Especially nowadays, it's super easy to get distracted. Like as soon as you look at your phone or turn on a TV, it's like all of a sudden all your plans go out the window. And so like I notice a significant difference in like the days when I don't look at my phone and the days when I look at my phone, because it's like if I don't look at my phone, it's totally directed based on what I choose. If I look at my phone, it just goes off in a totally different direction. So it's come to a point where I'm just like, okay, until I do all this stuff, my whole morning routine and whatever work I need to do, until I do that, I know there's notifications on my phone. They're just going to stay there. I'm not going to look because they're just going to up the whole day.
Well, it's important too. I think it's like, that's the other thing is like, as soon as you start focusing on what's important to you, as soon as you find what matters to you, and I think this is what people also forget, is that setting yourself up for success is also identifying your values, what's really important. Because once you know that, you can also really distinguish between what's really doesn't matter. Like, it's funny, like I know our routines in the morning are probably a little different because I have a puppy. So I get up in the morning and the first thing I do is I take him out. But when I do that, I actually jot down, I either use a notebook or my phone to write instead of like, because sometimes it's just easier with him. But like I basically have adjusted my routine to fit the obligation there so that I still don't miss out on things. And I think because I recognize that value, and you're right, if you get on your phone, if you start getting on TikTok, it's like you just waste this time, just goes away, and you can't stay focused on things when you have all these ideas being thrown at you constantly. When you're constantly being bombarded by different ideas, topics, whatever, entertained, and all this, it's like you can't stay focused on the task. And so I think scheduling time for that is really crucial too. It's not that you can't use your phone. But, you see a lot of people say like the first hour, I don't touch my phone, or, the first, like whatever. So you can get this routine done, get started and get sort of in the right direction before you get distracted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you win the first hour, you win the day. Definitely. Yeah. So we've kind of talked a little bit about, well, let's talk a little bit more about how to prepare for success. Because we mentioned that, when one of my favorite quotes is that success is always intentional. Like I heard it a couple times, and then I actually heard it and it sunk in and it opened up everything, because I realized that nobody got to be a success without putting in the work. Like, sure, people will be trust fund babies and they'll inherit a lot of wealth, but they usually live a terrible life and they hate it. But
Yeah.
every real success out there, it was intentional. It required planning, it required work, it required effort and struggle. And so let's talk about how to prepare for success, how to set up the ideal
You know,
environment or life.
I think I like what you said there too, because you're pointing out like I think a lot of people, the biggest struggle too, and I think we're all guilty of this. I don't think there's anybody that's not guilty of this, is envying those who you perceive to have wealth, status, power, envying the wealth, status, power, but not really conceptualizing what it took to get there, what it meant, sacrifices, obstacles. And so what you're really wishing for is like a lotto win or something. You're wishing for an immediate situation change with no effort. And it's like, well, that doesn't I mean, it doesn't really happen. Like if you really
And
want
they've shown conclusively on studies that all the lotto winners are more unhappy afterwards.
yeah,
You know,
because
it
they didn't
ruins
really
their
they didn't
life.
plan for it, right? Yeah, they didn't plan. They're not successful, right? They don't, and it doesn't matter. Even if you give somebody a ton of money right now, it's like if they don't have direction, goals, plans, what they want to do, it's like they're still not going to have that after the fact. Who you are doesn't change. And I think that's one of the biggest things with success that's hard to grapple with is like to really be successful, it takes a lot of self work and like, you know, it takes a lot of self reflection, awareness, and like that kind of work on yourself to have a successful life, to be successful in the world. So, I mean, I think one of the most important things personally is like identifying what matters to you, your values. You know, what do you think is important? Why? And how? Because that all aligns with your goals, with who you want to be. You know, all of that I think is crucial. But yeah,
And recognizing that it's not what society thinks you should do, you
yeah,
know,
no.
and it's not what your parents think you should do, and it's not what your friends think you should do. It's like what really resonates in you. And I've talked about this a few times before. I think it's kind of really hilarious how, you know, like when I was younger, I did what I wanted to do, and because it was unpopular, I was made fun of a lot, and so I changed completely. Like I used to love reading fantasy books like Lord of the Rings and all that
Oh, they're
stuff.
great. Yeah.
I used to love painting these little miniatures, and so like doing all these things that were like nerdy or whatever. And I I was just tormented in school for it, and I was like one of the uncool kids and all this stuff. And so I stopped doing that, and I became the person that I thought I was supposed to be. I started working on cars. I started lifting weights. I started doing pickup and like being able to talk to any girl. And just like, so like I went through this whole thing. And then now I come back to, oh, the stuff that I was doing before is actually really popular now. And, and it's like, and I still enjoy doing it. So why not just do it now? But it's kind of
You
like
know
one
what?
of life's comedies.
Well, it is though, and that's the funny thing. It's like, you know, if you focus on what's popular and stuff, that stuff just is cyclical. It comes back around, and it doesn't really matter. And I think what I like about that story is too is like you were doing you identify because you were young, you identified what you really liked doing, right? And because of external pressures, and I mean, you know, everybody's really vulnerable at that age to it. You know, it's hard, but you did all these things, changed in all these ways. But it's like what I like about that too is like, you know, for all of us, it's going to be different stuff. You know, the things we like to do, the things that we really value, they're going to be different. Like some of us might really want a family. Some of us might really want, you know, to live in the woods and just to, you know, whatever. But like they will be different. And if you can't identify that, you'll never be successful on your own terms. And you'll never be really happy because the good life is your life, right? And I love that example because there are people who probably like working on cars and like doing that stuff, and that's fine. But like in your circumstances, it just didn't make any sense. But you did it because, right, social pressure, and that's like, you know, I think that's probably harder now. It has to be, right, with social media and everything, and that kind of influence has got to make it really difficult to sort of identify what really matters to you and what's really valuable without that external influence. It's funny
Yeah.
when I was actually talking about this in my class the other day, and one of my students actually said they were like, you know, oh, I prefer it when my parents just tell me what to do. And I was like, and they were like, you know, because then I'm not responsible. And I was like, yeah, I get the feeling, right? Because you don't want to be, if it goes wrong or if something happens, you can blame someone else, right? Well, you told me to do this. You told me that this was better, or you told me this was valuable. But I was like, at the end of the day, you're still to blame. I was like, that's still your fault because you didn't think about it. You didn't reflect on it. You didn't understand if it was even worthwhile for you. Like
And
that's,
and worse than that, you got this one shot here to really like make
yeah,
it. You, I mean, you can either suffer through it, or you can make it the best that it can be.
yeah.
And so, like, but it's up to you. And whatever it is, the time's eventually going to run out.
It will. And the thing I like too, it's like, I think one of the things I've learned and probably in the last 10 years, I think is really important is, you have this one shot, but you can always start. You can always start to make it yours. You can always start to be a success, to plan to be a success, and to make whatever time you have the best it can possibly be. Because I think there's nothing worse than not trying. Because then you just accept some shitty situation for you know what I mean? And like instead of trying to make, because as soon as you try to make it better, it gets better. It absolutely always gets better as soon as you try, because now it's yours. And I think so. I think taking, being intentional, taking responsibility, being an agent is crucial to being successful. You have to figure that out in order to start living, the life that you want, having a good life.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it a couple times, taking action. And I have this so like one of these memories, this guy who taught me how to do SEO back in the day. He had a YouTube channel. I was like a huge fan of his, and I bought his courses and I learned how to do SEO, and I made money doing that. But I distinctly remember this one webinar that he was having, because like people kept asking him. He basically like presented people, if you want to start your own company doing SEO, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And all these people were like, well, what if I do this and then that happens? Well, what if I do this and then that happens? Well, what if I do this and then that happens? And it struck me so clearly when he's like, listen, it doesn't matter. You just do it. You'll figure it out. There's no way to plan ahead of the time.
No.
And he's like, this is the thing that separates the people who will succeed from those who won't, is you just go. You don't have to have it all figured out beforehand. You just go and then you figure it out.
Yeah. You just take a shot. That's the thing, because I think that is the critical difference, right? When you're talking about goals and goal accomplishment, the people that just try, the thing about them is that whatever they face, whatever obstacles, whatever unknowns, they're just going to keep trying to figure it out. They'll keep pushing ahead because, we talked about this, I think, one of the last episodes, right? The idea that, it's like once you have the idea of the goal, it's already achieved. It's just a matter of getting there. I think you quoted like Will Smith or something who said something along those lines, right? Mm-hmm. That, once I know I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. I think writing down goals, that's why it's so crucial. Because like once I know this is my direction, I'm headed that way. Nothing's going to stop me, right? And I think, this is one of the difficulties. There's people that keep asking those kind of questions. It's like, is this what you really want? Because you're just looking for excuses to fail now before you even start. And if that's what you want, then just quit. Just quit. You'll succeed in failing, right? I mean, that's the easiest thing to succeed in, is to just not do something.
Yeah. It kind of like this whole, okay, so Yoda said it, do or do not, there's no try.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And it kind of gets to the point where those are the two options that you have. You either do it all the way through, no matter what it takes, or you don't. There really is no trying. Like, because here's the thing, if you really want it, it doesn't matter the obstacles. You'll figure out a way.
Well, and I think it's like, that's why starting is so critical too, because once people start to realize that all these things that they built up in their head are false, all these challenges, obstacles, they can all be overcome, that's where that progress just starts to really happen. And I think, it's at core, I think this is why you need to know your values. You need to know your goals, because at the core of success, and I wanted to point out, I really like thinking of it in terms of the good life too, because I think it captures the broader idea of like, not just success in the sense of financial, but everything else. But like, I think all of that, goes together, because once you know what you want and stuff, and you're taking that action, it's like, it doesn't matter what happens. You're just going to get there. And once you see that that's most of it's made up, most of it's like fantastical things that are going to happen, and that it's really, within your power to just make it happen. It's like, none of this matters. None of this other bullshit that people are stressed about or worried. It's all obstacles you set upon yourself. And I think most of the time, it's because we don't know ourselves. And once you know your values or goals, it's like, it's easier to do that, right? Because you're not worried about this supposed failure or supposed obstacles. You're going to just try and do it because it's something that matters to you.
Definitely a great point. Um, there were, oh yeah. So another thing that I wanted to mention in terms of preparing for success is actually planning. So
Oh
like
yeah.
once you figure out what you want and once you figure out what your values are, then actually planning. And this is something that's like it's hard because it's work. And and also some people kind of just get stuck in this phase where they're just like they have to write out the whole entire bit. They've never had a business before, but they have to write out the whole business plan and they have to get this business coach and all this business stuff, and they never actually get started. So like there's the two sides of this thing. But what I wanted to say about planning is first off, that it's not the actual plan that matters. It's the
Nope.
process of planning, because that gets you primed for what's going to come ahead. And the second part is that no matter how hard you think it's going to be like 1,000 times harder. So,
Yeah.
so like planning for that as well, uh, because
You know, oh,
that way you prime yourself for the difficulties when they come up. You like when something comes up that's unexpected and really a pain, you're like, I knew this was going to happen. Instead of being like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. How am I ever going to make it through? You're like, I knew this would happen. I didn't know exactly what, but I knew something was going to happen. Yeah.
yeah, that was like the idea of negative visualizations, and I think like what is it, the thinking of it happening 1,000 times over and over again. And I think the guy mentioned that in the video, right? Where like if something bad happens, part of it is like a psychological game. It's like getting yourself accustomed to what this feels like and recognizing that if it just happened, if you visualize it happening a ton of times, one right after another, you'd realize by the 1,000th time that it just doesn't matter, right? It's not important because the fact is it happened. Now you got to move on from it, right? And I think that's one of the biggest blocks we all place on ourselves is we act like these little obstacles are the stopping point, that everything stops right now. And it's like, nope, life keeps going. So you can either just move on from that and do something else. And yes, sometimes it sucks, sometimes they're hard, but you just got to keep going because if you stop, everything that you're doing stops. And I think
Yeah.
that's it. It's a good point.
And I mean, it's worth kind of going into that a little bit deeper
Yeah.
because it does have it's something that can like change your life almost instantaneously if you really get it. Like, let's say you send an embarrassing text message to the wrong person, or let's say you like accidentally really offend somebody, or you do something that you realize is so freaking stupid, and like you're mortified, and it could ruin your whole day, your whole week, even your whole month. But like the idea of the 1,000x negative is that you just see that, and sure, this first time it's terrible, you
Yeah.
know, you feel the full brunt of it, but take some mental energy and say, okay, now let's pretend that this happened again and again and again, and every single day for 3 years the same thing happened. Don't you think at the end of that 3 years you'd be a little bit more like, whatever? And the crazy
Yeah.
thing is, once you get that perspective, you can be that way today.
There's no reason to wait, right? There's no reason to stay at number one. You just jump to the end. And I think that's what's great about it is it's like the 1,000x negative example is really good because it's just about thinking about and taking a perspective on things that's different from what is actually happening. And I think it helps us to like get a grip on our emotional state and on what's going on around us so that we can better act in the world by just realizing that most of these things are things that we're making into something big, right? Most of these obstacles we're making into something catastrophic that's going to waste energy, waste time, distract us all, like you said, for a week, for days. You never know. It's going to be on your mind in the background. If you can get past it, it's behind you. You move on, you go forward. And I think, yeah, it's a great way to think because it's really all about, and I think it highlights that major thing of focus, right? Of being intentional, having a direction and not letting yourself getting pushed and pulled because life does that to us, right? It makes us go all over the place. And it's like trying to find that way to stay on course, which is probably one of the hardest things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like that.
So I'd like to add another thing to setting yourself up for success. So, and it's kind of the whole idea of comparing yourself to others.
Oh my God,
or
yeah.
also perspective, however you want to phrase it. So like this guy Alex, we should just have named this episode the Alex Hormozy
Right.
episode.
No, it was a good.
So
It was a
anyways,
good. He did a good job with it. I liked it. Yeah, it was a good video. It
yeah,
was
I think he
helpful.
did this one episode on like or was this the same one, the 8 things that he learned from Charlie
That was
Munger?
the same one. Yeah,
Right?
yeah, it was the
Okay,
eight
yeah,
things you learned from. Yeah.
yeah. So one of these things was that Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, undisputedly some of the best investors ever,
Yeah, yeah,
ever.
without doubt. Yeah,
Okay, and yet every year somebody outperforms them, like
yeah.
the best ever, and yet they're still being outperformed every year. So like the idea that there will always be people better than you, and this is something that helped me out a lot because I went from a place of competing and also being extremely envious or jealous in a very negative fashion towards them, to all of a sudden being like, hey, I can learn from them, I can be happy for them, and also realizing that maybe that's not what I want too. Like having that success, it requires a lot larger commitment than I would even want to do.
Yeah,
So yeah, but it allowed me also to basically put up a marker that anytime I compare myself with other people, it's like big red flag. Stop,
yeah,
let it go, and then compare yourself to yourself last year, or compare yourself to yourself 10 years ago. And it's just like, oh,
yeah.
I'm doing really good. And also like in terms of perspective, like across the whole world, most of us are probably doing, I mean, if you have access to the internet, you're doing better than 25% of the world.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that's crucial, and from that too, just realizing like that when we focus on that kind of negative sort of like comparisons, I think that the danger is too, like you said, you're also like you're forgetting what's required sometimes to get there, the sacrifices, right? Like if you have many interests and you want to cultivate many interests, that kind of life is not going to work because 90% of the time it requires such effort and such work to get there that's all you're focused on all week, right? You don't have time for other stuff. And I think so this is what's crucial about understanding what really matters to you, right? What life is really the life that you want to create, because success is about creating a successful life. It's about creating a life that is your own. It's about really, I think, like that's it. One of the reasons why I always love the existentialists is because of authenticity, the idea of like making the world that you want to live in, your values, your life, who you are, making all of that, right? And defining that and realizing it in the world because it's ultimately your own, nobody else's. And I think that's crucial. Yeah, I like that too, because it's like those comparisons, I think, are what kills so many people, right? That constant worry, because it's like then you never have enough because you can always look outside and say, oh, they have more, they did better. This, and it's like, well, what the hell does success mean to you then?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
And
part of planning for success, right? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
here's another sticking point for people with success. They want success, but they're not willing to fail. And
Yeah.
I think that like in order to succeed, you have to be enthusiastic about failing. It's like fail fast, fail often, fail better. And they say that masters fail more times than other people even try. So like
Yeah.
that's how you learn, just by failing. And it seems counterintuitive and it seems painful, but the failures are that's how we learn very quickly. And so the more you can fail, the quicker you can succeed.
Well, it's how we learn, it's how we figure out what the problems are and how to overcome them. And I think the biggest difference, like you said, right, is that the masters fail so often because most of the other people just give up. They don't ever really embrace or face the failure, right? They don't try to overcome it. They don't try and get past it. And I think that's the other point, because once you get past it, you're going to fail again. You're bound to. It's always going to happen, and you have to keep at it. And even, it's like, I don't think there's anything we can do that we're not going to fail at some point. And then you keep going. It just becomes part of the successful process, right? And I think, we said so much in this episode. What do you think are some of the main takeaways do you think that people should, for planning to, really preparing yourself and planning for a successful life?
Well, what are you thinking?
I mean, I'm definitely thinking, we have to, I think, goals and values, getting those clear. So writing them down, because I think that's really one of the first steps to even being able to plan and being able to actually sort of have a direction and focus, which is what you're really after, I think, is direction and focus. So it's like getting that stuff clear, which is a lot of self-reflection and thinking. Once you start doing that and writing those things down, I think the sort of planning becomes part of that process. It just sort of inevitably follows because you start thinking about how to realize it, and you're sort of on track there. But I really do. I think the values and understanding, that you can do it, that none of the stuff you're placing before you and mentally, these imaginary sort of obstacles, limits, sort of blocks, none of that stuff is really true unless you let it be true or make it true by not trying. So I think, those would be like probably my top things, I think. So,
Yeah, those are great ones. I'm actually going to say something that we kind of didn't mention
go
yet.
for it. Yeah.
So the mentality, so like a lot of people, I think, don't succeed because they give up too quickly. And so the mentality that I'm going to fail until I get it. So like Les Brown always said, it's not over until I win. And it's that mentality, because given a long enough time frame, you can achieve anything. It's just like, mathematically, you can achieve anything on a long enough time frame. And but most people want success, in the next 2 months or this year or whatever it is. But stop thinking in terms of such short time spans. Think this decade, this 30 years, whatever it is, because then you're giving yourself a chance to actually get it right. And then you'll be messing up. You'll be 2 years in and you'll be messing up over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And instead of getting down on yourself, you're saying, hey, I'm only 2 out of 30 years into this. I still got a lot of time to figure this out to get better. So like the idea of embracing failure and also having a longer time horizon, I think that's really important in success.
Oh, dude, I think that, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's crucial, especially in like embracing the failure and having a longer timeline are so important, because it's like it's also that attitude that goes with it, right? Of just like, these are my goals, they're gonna happen, they're gonna be realized in the world, and that's it. I think those are so good. And I think that goes with planning too, planning for it, being ready for it. And it takes time. It does take time to break that mentality, those expectations, really quick expectations of instant gratification, all of that. It takes time to sort of, I think, break out of, but it is doable. And I think everyone can succeed. The biggest block is that we're in our own way. I really do think that's true. Like,
and you mentioned it right there, how like everybody thinks it's kind of like black and white, or like a 1 or a 0 or something like that, binary almost, where like either you are or you're not. But it's not particularly that way. It's, hey, if I can get 1% better, then I'm a little bit closer. And then from there, another 1% better. And so like with the planning, I remember for a long time, I wouldn't plan because I wanted to have the perfect plan. I wanted to have it all figured out, and I wouldn't start because I wanted to be perfect. And it's like, just having something that's decent is better than nothing. And it's better than perfect, because perfect doesn't exist.
It's funny you mentioned that, that whole mentality of having the perfect plan, right? And so you just keep planning and planning and planning. It's like, that's like one of those mechanisms to keep you from trying, right? To block yourself from going forward, from actually just rolling the dice or taking that action. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I think that's important, right? This idea that you have to start at some point. But I also think what you mentioned there too is important, because like that goes back to self-comparisons. I think what people focus on, they focus on what's outside of them rather than their own lives, their own experiences, and what's inside. And once you start comparing yourself to yourself, you realize that as soon as you start whatever you're doing, you're already on the road to success. You're already more successful than you were the second you start, because you're doing it. And I think we forget this so much, that when we have this conception of success built from the outside, it seems impossible, insurmountable. But as soon as you start building it from your own life, you're immediately on the right path, because you're already making it happen just by acting. And I think when we forget that, it's like you can't do it, because you're always going to find negative comparisons. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I think everybody's ready to succeed now.
Yeah, they should be, right? That should be all the information you need. That should be ready to go, plan for success. So, anything else you want to add?
Uh, I think you just need to just go for it. You don't need to get it
Yeah,
all
right.
figured out. Just start now.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think just start now, start writing stuff down, start getting those things out there, and start acting in the world, right? Set yourself up, in other words, for success. Well, thank you all for sticking with us, listening. Check us out, obviously, on YouTube. Like, subscribe to all that stuff. It really helps us out. This was episode 46, Setting Yourself Up for Success. We'll be back midweek with a short, quick fix, a short 10-minute episode covering one self help topic. Until then, though, it was great. See you, Randy.
Later, Danny.